will be starting right now here. Can you see my screen, Rob?
I got it. Looking great.
Perfect. All right, so for everyone that's still here, we're going to be talking about adding very large databases to availability groups. So I completed a project earlier this year where I had to move an 80 terabyte database, go through the process of upgrading it and added it to availability groups, and I kind of wrote a blog post on the steps of doing it, and Rob really liked it and wanted me to present that here, so that's how we got to today here. So a little bit about me, I'm an independent consultant. I actually run the high availability and disaster virtual chapter, so if anyone's seen any webinars over there, you've probably seen me as I've hosted those meetings and present there as well. So if anyone has a need to learn how to build a solid high availability disaster recovery plan, I'll be doing a Precon in Pittsburgh on Friday, and also Ryan Adams in Dallas, Texas, if you're down in that way, he'll be doing a similar one as well. So if you like what you see in today's presentation, and you're going to be at the SQL Saturday in Dallas or Pittsburgh, I would highly recommend that you see if you can get into one of those Precons. All right, so enough of the sales pitch. Let's jump in here and go straight to our content and what we want to focus on. And so when you're working with very large databases, this is the initial biggest problem with getting started with availability groups. At some point, when you want to start your availability group, you have to do the initial data synchronization. And there's 3 default options here. So when you're doing, smaller databases that are maybe, a gig or, 20 gig or even lower, doing the full option, which the full option here behind the scenes is going to do a copy-only full backup and then log backup, and then copy that over to your secondaries and restore them all over there. That's perfectly fine. But when you're working with very large databases, this is just not an option. And we'll go into a lot of reasons why and how you can pre-stage and plan this so you can easily add a very large database with no downtime. And we'll walk through some of those steps there using one of the 2 options below you see in green, which is join only, which is the one we'll focus on here today. So what we'll actually end up doing, and we'll list quite a few reasons why this is very helpful for you, is we'll actually pre-stage the initial data synchronization. And there's multiple tools that you can use to help with this. One being log shifting, which we'll mostly focus on, but another one also is data mirroring, which we'll touch up on as well. So if you're new to log shifting, it's a very easy process. Basically, once you have your full backups in place and you have your point of starting, it's really just transactional log backups on your primary, and then those get copied over to your secondary, so you can have more than one secondary, and then it restores them. So way back when I was a full-time DBA and I was working for my first job as a DBA, we were starting to spin up our second data center, and we were talking about how we would move over all of our critical databases. One of the suggestions was, we'll put everything in a truck, we'll cut the power off on the servers, we'll drive them over to the second data center, and we'll power them on. Well, that's one way on how you can move a lot of data. You can actually use log shipping if your data doesn't have a whole lot of changes going on with it, where you can easily do a differential restore and sync your data and get that process going. So I included a link here in the PowerPoint, which I'll give to Rob so all you guys can access this link. But it's basically an article I wrote years ago on MS SQL Tips that goes from step to step on how you can configure log shipping with very large databases over there. So another key thing to point out, which is a good benefit of log shipping and using this to pre-stage your environment for adding your databases during your cutover or downtime window for setting up your availability group, is you can have a warm standby. On top of that, if you want, you can even do some reporting off of it by using the standby mode there. So when we actually go through and we're going to configure availability group, it would need to be in the no recovery mode over there. But if you needed to, you can query against that data while it's in sync and while you have your secondary set up for log shipping. Another nice thing about log shipping is you can control when the restores happen too. So as I mentioned, it's just copy log backup, take a log backup, copy the log backup, and restore it. But until you go live, if you wanted to have a warm standby to where there was a delay in restores in case somebody did a delete clause and they forgot the where statement in the delete or the where clause in the delete statement, you could still have that data and go back to it. So a lot of great benefits into log shipping, and especially using that to help prep for getting your availability group going with your very large database. So once again, just to kind of drill this home, log shipping really is just a series of log backups on your primary. Those backups get copied over to the secondary servers, then the data can be restored over there on the secondary servers. So a couple things to note, and this applies to log shipping, or even if you were to attempt and go in and to initialize your new database using the default option for doing the full backups and restores. You're going to miss out on some opportunities that can dramatically improve the time it takes for you to do backups and restores. Now, this is one of the reasons why I love to pre-stage when I set up my log shipping for large databases. So everything that you see here in black, so this can be done through the graphical interface for log shipping. We can't actually do this for adding if you're going to do a full option of doing your initial data sync through the availability group. You could set your default setting for the instance to do backup compression and it would pick that up there. But there's not an option through the GUI itself to specify that. But the big important things that can give you the most improvement here are highlighted in red. So the very first thing here is you can split up your backup to multiple files if you pre-stage this, and we have a demo that will walk through this in case you've never done this before. You can also specify some knobs that are built in for actually tuning your backups and restores to make them go faster. So we'll show you how you can specify the buffer counts and the max transfer size. So that way you can benchmark and you can improve the time it takes to do your backup and restores. So for example, when I was doing this before on a database that was over 80 terabytes, it would take about 6 days by default with none of these settings baked in. And then after we did some backup and restore tuning, we were able to bring this down to where it was less than a day to do both the backups and restores. So initial steps here. So these are some things that you would want to set up before you go live. So the first thing is you'd want to go ahead and make sure that you have an availability group, just because this will help you with testing to the fact where you can make sure your endpoints are valid, you're not going to have connectivity issues. And from there, we can go ahead and set up log shipping, where we would want our primary for log shipping to be that same primary in the availability group. So once we have that done, then through our go live scenario, this is the simple steps that you can go through to bring that database over into your availability group. All you'd have to do there is just go ahead and execute the log shipping backup job that will be created on the primary of where you set up log shipping. Once that runs, you go ahead and disable the actual job so it won't do future log backups. And then you do the same thing on the secondary servers where you would run the copy job to bring the latest log backup over so everything is in sync. At that point, you would obviously have your connections if they're coming in disabled for this short period of time, and go through here and do your restore over on the secondaries. So once that's done, then you could go through the process of doing the join instead of doing a full initial data synchronization to bring your databases into the availability group. And we'll have a demo that walks through all of this here. So post setup here, we'll go through and validate the health to make sure that the data movement's going and that you're good. Once that's done, then you can go ahead and remove log shipping on the primary, because now your database is in the availability group. And then, of course, the third step, which I want to make sure you wouldn't forget here, is Log shipping does your log backups for you. So if you're going to go ahead and break that, you need to make sure that you have a process that's doing your log backups for you now that your database is in the availability group. So with that, we'll go ahead here and jump into our first demo where we'll go over a small little database due to time here, showing you the steps of pre-staging the backup and restoring so we can kind of turn some of those performance knobs. And then we'll go through the process of actually adding our pseudo very large database here into our availability group. Before I do this, Rob, do we have any questions that popped up over those first couple of slides?
No, we're good.
Okay, perfect. All right. So for these scripts here, I kind of set them up to where we have SQL Connect mode already, so that way I can go through and I can connect to, for example, my primary here, and we could go ahead and do our backup of our full and our log here, and then go ahead and do the restores over here. Just to kind of bring everyone up to speed here, we have a 2 replica availability group that's already just out here. So I'm going to go ahead and we have a demo database here for today called Log Shipping Demo. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and go through the process of adding this as if it was a very large database to where it was too big that we wouldn't want to actually physically do the join using the full in sync option. And I'll show you why here. So for example, let's go ahead and look at our always on availability group. And we'll go over here and say, you know what, we want to add a new database. And we'll select our, in our case, this is really, really tiny. It's only 4 MB, but in reality, this would be a very large database for you. I'm going to go through and say, next, we'll even select here our full recovery option, because if you ever are going to use the GUIs inside of Management Studio, I strongly recommend that you actually go to the process where you can script things out so you can see what it's really doing under the hood. So we're not actually physically going to add it, but we're going to go all the way to the process to where we can script this out. So it's going to validate in here. So if I was going to implement this, I would click Finish, but I would never want to do this with a very large database. And you'll see why here when we script this out. So I'm going to cancel this because no, I do not want to add the database to the high availability group. So it's telling you you must be in SQL command mode here. So if you've never used SQL command mode, it's as simple as going down to query over here and selecting SQL command mode. And the main reason why you're going to see that here in a lot of these scripts that get generated is it's just automating the processes going back and forth between the replicas. So here's the part that really concerns me with very large databases. This is what's happening by default, and you really have no knobs when you just go through the GUI and say, do a full initial data sync. It's going to go ahead and only back up to one single file. So you're not splitting out files so you have different threads being built out for each file that can be accessed that can do your actual backup and restores in parallel. So when you're working with very big databases, you definitely want to make sure you're splitting your files out so that way you can go parallel when you're doing your backups and restores. Also, I have compression in here, but that's just because it's by default. If I didn't have compression as a default setting on my instance level, that wouldn't be an option in there. At the same time, you'll see there's no options in here for adjusting the buffer counts or the max transfer size. So these are two knobs that can be very helpful from the performance side. But because I'm going to have a very large backup that would have to be going and restoring over the network here, this is just a recipe for disaster with very large databases. I strongly would not recommend doing full initial sync just from seeing your default options in here. So if you wanted to, you could go through here and then you could adjust these. But still, I would rather pre-stage everything so when I'm actually adding my databases to the availability group, I'm doing the least amount of work as physically possible. All right, so now we can kind of see why adding a full database with very large databases isn't a good idea through the GUI. let's go through how I would recommend doing this process. So the very first thing that you would do would be doing some backup and restore tuning, not on your production servers, so you could kind of figure out your sweet spots for how much memory should I be using while I'm doing my backup and restores, and also what size should I use for transferring those blocks of data across the wire as well. So this by itself can be its own talk, and in fact, last week I did a 45-minute session on this for Embarcadero at their Data U online conference. So all those sessions were recorded. So if you want to see a lot more about backup tuning and restore tuning, you can go ahead and see that over there at Embarcadero's website. But for the main point here, what I'm showing you is we're just, we've did some work, and we know these settings are a lot faster and will greatly improve the amount of time it takes to do backups and restores. So here, I'm going to go ahead and do my backup here, where I'm going to get my last full analog backup. Out here, we're going to go ahead and run this, and then we're going to do our restores too. So at the same point, a lot of people who realize that you can change your buffer count and max transfer size on backups may not know that you can also do the same thing and have different values for your restore as well. The other thing we're going to point out here is you want to make sure that you are restoring in no recovery, because this is going to be our requirement so we can actually add the database into our availability group. So now that I have this in SQL command mode over here, I'm just going to go ahead and run these. Oh, and it looks like someone did not clean up over here. Let me go ahead and delete that. And then for our demo purposes here, I'll go ahead and rerun it. Since I'm doing format over here, that'll rewrite over our backup files here for the purpose of this demo. All right, let's just go ahead and refresh here. So we have it in our restoring state over there. So it does not make sure the name is correct, connecting over to DR2. And it's showing that it's doing the full restore over here. All right, so let's move on to our next step over here, which would be to go ahead and add log shipping on here. So this is something that you can do without a downtime because you're not going to add any extra workload to the actual transaction log. All this is doing your normal log backups and copying them over the network and restoring them so you're constantly keeping your data in sync. So this is something I would want to do quite a bit before we're actually planning to add the database to the availability group. So if we go over here on log shipping, we could say we're going to go ahead and enable this. We'll set up our backup settings here. So for example, this is where we would put in our network path. So for this one, we can say a prod here. We can say going over to where we would want these log backups to actually be taken. So from here, we could set this up. And then this will be the actual path of where we want these log backups to go. Locally on our server here, so we have our SQL backups here. And then once again with log shipping here, we can actually change the compression setting. This is the one little knob we have with doing backups through log shipping. So now that we have that set up, we can go ahead and set up to use our secondaries here. So for example, here's our DR server, and because the database is already there, we're going to see here that we can actually just initialize here that we actually don't have to do the whole full backup process like you would do through the GUI for doing your doing the full initial sync for the availability group. So because of that, all we're going to do is just sync it. This is going to say where we want to copy these files over to. So from here, we could say C:/SQL backup over here. And just double check and make sure that that is our path here. In fact, I even created a little subfolder out on this server to keep all those log backups in the same subfolder per database. So I'm just going to copy paste that. At the same time here, we can control how long we keep the log backups here and how often we're going to do the copy process. So, and this is where we'll actually physically configure the actual restore. So because we're doing this to prep for our availability group and constantly keep this data in sync, so we can add this during the time that works with the control process, we're going to keep this in no recovery mode. So we'll go ahead and run this. And we'll see that now we actually have log shipping going. Here I've scripted out just all the steps that's going on behind the scenes. But if we go over here and we go to properties, and we look at log shipping, we're going to see this is configured here. At the same point, if we actually go to our SQL agent over here, we're going to see that we have, let me refresh. And you'll see that we have our backup job here on the primary, specified by our database name here. And then we're going to have our copy and restore jobs on our secondary servers. So the other nice thing with log shipping is you can have multiple secondaries. So if you need to add your very large database into multiple replicas, you can prep them at different times. Just as long as they're all in sync when you're going to do your cutover, you're good to go. So if we go ahead and look at my secondary server here, we're going to see that we have our copy and restore jobs right here. All right, so let's go ahead and say it's time for us to go through and do our cutover here. So the very first thing that we'll want to do here is go to our SQL agent here. On our primary, which for the case today, this is prod 1, which you'll see is also our primary for our availability group as well as log shipping. I'm going to go ahead and start our backup. So once this is done here, I'm going to go ahead and disable it because I don't want any more backups to happen while I'm doing the cutover of the data that's in sync here. So we'll have that. We'll go ahead and we'll see here that this is done. We can see that we ran our job that it completed. So we'll do the same thing over here on our copy and our restore. So we'll go ahead and we'll prep this and get this going. And I'll go ahead and disable it as well. Make sure that our copy finished. In fact, here we can see it's still going. And now it's done and it's disabled. And we'll do the same thing for our restore. And we'll go through here and we'll disable this as well, just to prevent us from having any other log backups that go across the wire and are backed up and restored. So to validate here, I have another script over here for validating log shipping. So there's actually a stored procedure that can be run across both the primary and the secondaries that can be very helpful for monitoring the status of your log shipping. So here I'm going to go ahead and run this in SQL command mode here so I can run it across both instances. I'm going to see here that I have log shipping set up for different databases, but we're just going to focus on log shipping demo here for today. So last copied, this will let you know the very last log backup that was copied and how long since that copy occurred. What we should see to validate here is this same backup file we'll see on our secondary servers. We could see this was copied and also was restored. So we want to make sure that these three files over here match. This is a nice way to guarantee that you are in sync and you have the very last log backup and that you're completely in sync from that last backup. All right, so now that we have this in place, we can go ahead and add our database into the availability group. So before you would actually add it, you would want to once again make sure that these values are the same here so that way you have everything in sync as your last backup that went across. So I'll close this out here, and then if you want to, you can go through and use the GUI here. So for example, I can go on my primary, say add database here, and we'll see now that we can select our database and add it through. And just like we walked through before, don't do full, but if we wanted to, we could do join only and join it. I always like to have a full understanding whenever I'm learning something for the first time, or also whenever I'm teaching and presenting. I want to go through what's really happening underneath the GUI. So we'll actually look at the script that you would use to go ahead and add these in there. So same thing here, we'll go over to SQL command mode. And so the very first step here, this is connecting to your primary, and this is saying, okay, I want to add the new database in. So I'm going to go ahead and run this here. So if we do that, we're going to see if I refresh here, we have our new database on our primary. I'm going to actually load up our dashboard here because I want to show you that this is just half of the equation. So this is adding it to the availability group, and on the primary it's going to be there healthy and in sync, but we never actually physically joined it to the secondaries over here. That's actually the second part of our script. So if I go back here and I run now to where I'm going to connect to my secondaries, and I'm saying go ahead and actually add this in there to physically join it on the secondary, we can refresh our dashboard and see that it's now part of our secondary as well. So if I refresh my databases here, we're going to see that we're synchronized over here. And if I go over and refresh here, we're going to see that our database is added and we're healthy on this side. So a couple of things to note here. We see our status over here changed to synchronized, and we see that our database is there on our secondary as well. So if we pop back over to our dashboard, we'll see this auto refresh, and we can see that we're healthy and we're completely live with our very large database inside of our availability group. So that's the process that I would go through. So I can do all the hard work without a downtime, even taking existing backups if I've already did backup and restore tuning where I've twisted those knobs, which I would strongly recommend that you do as any part of a HADR plan. Go ahead and restore on the multiple secondaries and different data centers if necessary. Get the log shipping going so that way all of the replicas are in sync, and then come in here and just repeat that process that we just walked through. Any questions, Rob, about how one can easily go through and add a very large database to an availability group?
Well, we do have one question here.
Okay.
Let me find out. Oh, it's from this. I got another question. Okay, it says I have two databases, one OLTP, which is about 100 gigabytes, and another 5 terabytes, which is 95% of it is file stream data. Both are important for the app to work. We're building a Windows 2012 R2 cluster with AGs. I am hesitant to put both in the same availability group. What should we consider in setting it up?
Well, so there's a lot that goes to that question, and I wish I could talk to this person here face to face because there'd be probably a lot of follow-up questions I'd want to drive in to help him build his strategy for this. But the one key thing I heard is that both those databases are required and are needed by the application. Is that correct, Rob?
That's what I'm reading into the question, yes.
Yeah, so if that assumption is true, you really probably want those two in the same availability group if possible, because you wouldn't want one database to switch where its primary is and the other one not, unless you have everything baked in to handle that. So like I said, that's kind of more of a longer architecture question. I'll tell you what, if this person's on the line here, shoot me an email at jsterrett, Sterrett, at gmail, and I'd be happy to spend 15 minutes or so talking and helping you flush out some options and pros and cons for some scenarios you may want to take. So if you can, Rob, go ahead and shoot that guy over my email address.
Sure.
I'd love to follow up offline with him.
I'll email him now. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, so switching now over to another option. So you can actually use database mirroring to pre-stage your availability group, or your database to be added to an availability group. I personally use log shipping, and I actually have not used mirroring myself, and we'll kind of go over some reasons why here. But first, so just a real quick introduction to database mirroring. You basically have a primary, or what's known as a principal, and a secondary, or what's known as a mirror. So with database mirroring, you can only have one single mirror. So you can really only have a primary that goes off to one single mirror or secondary. Where log shipping, you can have multiple secondaries. So if you're working with multiple replicas, you would have to either combine these two, because you can only use mirroring to pre-stage for one of them. So with that said, you have multiple options, which you'll see be pretty familiar and similar if you've already done some research on availability groups. So you have basically synchronous and asynchronous, or what's known in mirroring as high safety and high performance. There's a witness that could be used for automatic failover inside of database mirroring, where obviously the availability group uses Windows failover clustering to help with that process. So there's one key thing I want to point out here, which is another driver why I'm not a huge fan of using database mirroring to prepare a very large database for availability groups. And it's the fact that you can't just upgrade a mirror to be an availability group database. Even though a lot of the concepts are very similar, for example, you have endpoints that's used to actually send the hardened data. That's pretty much exactly the same between mirroring and availability groups. If you actually try to add a mirrored database, you'll see on the GUI here that it won't allow you to do so. So in order to pre-stage by having database mirroring here, what you can do is temporarily disable those transactional log backups, remove the actual database mirroring on the principal, and then go ahead and add it, just like we did through log shipping, where you'd add the primary and then the secondaries, and then re-enable your log backups. So the other thing to point out, if you're using database mirroring and you just have your principal and your mirror, which is all you're allowed, you can use failover partner in your connection strings to help you with connectivity. If your availability group is just going to be the two replicas, you can still use that failover partner in a connection string. If you're going to go to a third or more replicas, though, that's when you may want to consider looking at availability group listeners and using that for your single point for connectivity. So with that, we'll go ahead and we'll demo the process of using database mirroring in here. So we'll go ahead and we'll quickly configure database mirroring, then we'll break it down and we'll do the same process here to add your very large database that was initially synchronized by doing database mirroring to add it to the availability group. All right. So going over here, I'm going to go ahead and break down log shipping over here. So we'll go back over to our primary here. And this is what you would do after you validate. So before here on our last demo, we showed here that we validated that we're in sync. A lot of people don't know that there's more options you can even add straight out of the dashboard. So for example, here we can check our last received LSNs, our last hardened, so we can see exactly how far off, and we can look at the time of those as well. So for here, we've deemed that we're good here, so we'll go ahead and kill our log shipping. So if I go back over here on the primary and we say our demo here, I'm just going to go in here and go over to log shipping and remove it. And the other key thing about mirroring is you can still use log shipping to prep for mirroring as well if you wanted to. So we're going to go ahead and remove that, and once I did that, you're going to see that our jobs are going to go away. So for example, our backup here that we disabled should now be removed when I refresh over here, and it's gone, and same thing over here on our secondaries. So when I go here and refresh, we're going to see that the copy and restore are gone as well. So from in here, now we can say we want to pre-stage using database mirroring. So we can go over to our properties here, enable database mirroring. We're going to say no, we don't want a secondary here. And you'll see, because we always have always-on availability groups set up, and the endpoint's already configured, it's going to detect and just use our endpoint that's already there for our availability group. So same thing on our DR server here. And then in here we'll put in our actual service account for the instances. So this would grant the connect to the endpoints if it wasn't there. All right, we'll say start our mirroring. Let me check. Oh, and this is a great point. So our error that popped up there is basically saying that it's already been configured. And the reason why it's stating this is because we already added it to our availability group. So obviously you wouldn't be able to add it into mirroring. So that's a good demo there, because it'll show us that we need to actually make sure that we have it removed in here. So here's my steps for removing it. So this will physically remove us from our availability group so we can have that starting point of syncing and doing our initial data synchronization through mirroring instead of actually log shipping. All right, so we're connecting over to our DR server over there, so we can go ahead and disable our secondary replica and then physically remove it over here on the primary. All right, so our query's done there. So now to double check here and make sure, if we go and refresh our availability group databases, we'll see that it's no longer in there. So let's go ahead and we'll refresh here, and we'll see it's no longer synchronizing because it's not part of the availability group. And now we can go ahead and synchronize with database mirroring to prepare. So we'll say once again no over here to the witness, connecting over on the DR, specifying the principal service account, and now we'll go ahead and start up our mirroring. And now we can see that we're fully synchronized in here. Once again, if we wanted to monitor our status, and here you're going to see that our status changes. We can see this is our principal, which is our primary here, and we're also synchronized over here. But we can also use the built-in tool for monitoring. If we went over to the tasks and we wanted to say launch database mirroring monitor, so we would see everything that's live in there as well. All right, so going back and refreshing over here, So if we wanted to go through and add, we could go through on our process here, and as we showed in the slides here, we're going to see that we're not going to be able to physically add our database because it's already part of database mirroring. And database mirroring was used to configure, to set up our data so it's in sync. So when we actually do our cutover for our very large database, this is actually done with very little downtime and data movement at the time of adding to the availability group. So we'll see that in there. Yep, we do not want to continue. So when we'd actually go in and we would want to synchronize here, we'd want to make sure that our log backup job is disabled, which we can see that I already did here before we started. And then we'd go back in here and actually remove our database mirroring. So at this point, you're going to have your consistent data that's close in sync, so that way it can kick off the synchronization from our point of stopping database mirroring. So when you stop this, you would want to set up and add the database as soon as possible to the availability group. So if we go through on here and we refresh, we're going to see we're no longer part of database mirroring. And if I was to go back to my step here for adding the database, this is exactly the same process here. So we'll go ahead and add it on the primary, and then add it on our secondary as well. And so from there, we'll go ahead and refresh, and we'll see that our database is now part of our availability group. It's in synchronized status over there. And if we refresh over here, and we can see that it's added once again back into our database over here. So that's showing you how you can use database mirroring if you want to keep your data in sync for that initial data synchronization step that's required for adding a database to an availability group. So what's the difference between these two here? So here's just some, not all of the differences that I wanted to point out that should be considered when you decide whether you should use mirroring or log shipping to help pre-stage the initial data synchronization requirement for adding very large databases to availability groups. So right out of the bat, if you know you're going to have multiple replicas, database mirroring is only going to have your one mirror. So you're just going to have your principal, which could be considered primary, and your secondary, which is the mirror. With log shipping, you can have multiple secondaries. So the data actually physically gets synced by using log backups, doing the log backup, copy, and restore with log shipping. So with database mirroring, this is different. It's actually going to harden the transactions and send them over and add them based on whether you're doing synchronous or asynchronous mode for database mirroring. So there could be impacts there depending on your options there on your current production system while you're synchronizing data to prepare for adding it to the availability group. So you could do delay restores on log shipping. We can pause and resume if we need for database mirroring. But this, unless you're proactively doing this, this wouldn't help you in a case where someone may run a delete statement and forget their where clause, where a delay restore may not have restored that data that had that command in there yet, so you can still pull data from your very large databases. You have no automatic failover with log shipping, where you can with database mirroring if you need that before you add the database to the availability group. So also with database mirroring, you can have some automatic page repairs just like you would with availability groups. But once again, if you're going to have more than one replica that needs to be in sync while you're adding your very large database across the replicas, you're going to have that hard limit of you can only use mirroring to synchronize one mirror, or log shipping would do multiple secondaries. So here's some more references. So once again, I did that MS SQL tips post a long time ago about how to do log shipping with very large databases. That gives you a good step-by-step example about how you can set that up. I have a link there to my blog post on how I was able to use log shipping to allow me to have no downtime for adding a very large 80 terabyte database to an availability group. And then there's a couple of white papers by Microsoft as well that I've thrown in that are related to what we talked about today here. So if you thought this was a helpful topic and you know you're going to be around Dallas, Texas this weekend or Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I'd strongly recommend checking out the HADR Precons that are going on at both events on Friday. It's a all-day seminar going over building an actual HADR plan at a fraction of the price of what it would take to bring in consultants to help you do it for you. You can learn a lot of the key parts of it and get a good start on building out your plans from attending those Precons. And with that, Rob, I will send it back over to you here.
Okay.
In case we had some more questions we wanted to go through.
Well, at this point, we're right at our cutting off time. I have very few questions, so I'm going to forward them off to you, John, at this point.
Okay.
I want to thank everyone for being patient and staying on the webinar during our little technical difficulty earlier today. And it is being recorded, and I'll have links on the past website to John's website and the recordings. And I want to thank everyone for attending. And thank you, John, for giving your time today. And that's all I have.
No problem.
Thank you.
Alrighty, talk to you guys later. Hope everyone has a great day or evening, depending upon where they are.
Yes, you do too. Bye.